So on his way. He yelled at me down the hallway, but I told him I was getting into the meeting. He said, hold on. So don't tell him I told you guys that, though.
Your secret's safe, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, there's no microphone or anything, yeah.
Don't tell anyone, but why is
big
Dino
deal.
calling me? Just kidding.
I didn't double check. Jeff, are you on?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay.
All right, it seems that we have everyone here, so let's go ahead and get started with the budget retreat. Chair recognizes Manager Layton.
Mayor, thank you so much. This is your second retreat. I'll tell you right now, this has been hard to get ready for. The staff has been working pretty diligently to try to get a better understanding of ARPA and what that means for us. And so there will be a lot of discussion of that. As you know, the legislature also changed the law regarding transparency and giving notification. That's all been clarified now, and we're going to provide some information on that. Because, and to be honest with you, staff was still last night trying to strike a balance and looking at revenue sources and all that. So that's, I'm probably going to recommend that after the June 1st meeting, we meet again to talk more about this, because you're seeing all this for the first time. There are a lot of policy questions and options here. We're gonna need your guidance. Love to get feedback today, but I don't want you to feel like there's a gun to your head that you have to make a lot of serious, hard decisions right now. I'd like you to be able to consider the implications of what you're seeing. And there are a lot of trade-offs regarding money that goes into the operating budget, money that goes to capital, and money that could go to community initiatives. So with that context, I think maybe if this is all right with you, what I'd like to do is have Elizabeth step through the PowerPoint, and let's get through all of the slides in the PowerPoint that'll give you some background information, updates since the last workshop. And then I'd also like to go through the line item sheet, answer questions you have as we're going through it, but then come back and revisit all of this once you've heard it all. Because that way you'll have a better context for the discussion and providing us guidance. If I ask you to, for instance, on the first page to talk about, general fund hiring or whatever, I don't think it's very meaningful until you've seen pages 2, 3, 4, 5 and go through it that way. So if that's all right with you, that's I think the best way to kind of push forward on this. And so with that, Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. This is our second retreat on the budget process, so I'll step in. An outline, we're going to provide an update on the budget process, and that will include the updates to the tax lid that are part of SB 13. I'll also be providing you an updated budget outlook for the general fund. We'll step through the options that are on the handout, and then talk some about the ARPA, what's involved with it, our award, and the timeline and such, and then leave some time at the end for discussion. So one of the changes this year, as the city manager already mentioned, is updates to the tax lid that is part of state statutes. Under the old tax lid, there were a lot of exemptions for property tax growth, increases in public safety spending, and there were debt service fund was exempted, expiration of abatements were exempted, In the new tax lid, which we'll also refer to as SB 13, there are no exemptions. I think the key word for the new tax lid is probably notification. There's a lot of notification requirements that are new. It's also changed the calendar some. We'll need to notify the county clerk by July 20th if we plan on exceeding what they're calling the revenue neutral rate. For this year, we'll need to have a notification in the newspaper, which is what we've done every year. And we'll also, localities are required to post this on their website should they have one. So we do. Regarding the tax lid process, City Council direction will impact the development of the budget. So for the past 27 years, we've had a flat mill levy. Should we go with the revenue neutral rate, which is what is in SB 13, we would forego at least $1.5 million in 2022, and that would, of course, compound over time. I participated in a State of Kansas workshop with their municipal services team a few weeks ago, and their staff recommends proceeding with the notification process regardless of your intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate. And that, I don't want to go into too many details and lose you so early in the presentation, but what they provide us in June is preliminary assessed valuation, and then in November is final assessed valuation, and there's usually some movement between those two numbers. And that sort of movement could really put your budget in jeopardy to have to go through some different processes. So they have suggested that everybody go through with the R&R notification process. Another factor, of course, is ARPA. There is some language in the interim guidance that suggests that, we'll go into that later, but regarding tax rates. So on to more familiar territory. Resident engagement is something we've included in the budget process forever. I think this is actually going to be our 10th year for the social media town hall, so it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it is. We are scheduled to attend DAB meetings June 2nd through 14th. We plan on having the simulator live on June 7th, and about 3,000 budgets were completed last year. And then the social media town hall is scheduled for June 22nd. One exciting change this year is that we're going to have the opportunity to have the participants in DAB meetings complete the simulator as a group. And so we'll have that open to the group in the meeting, and then at the conclusion of them completing their budgets in the simulator, we'll be able to report out on the average results for the group. So that we've done that a couple of times at other meetings, and people really enjoy it.
Hey, Elizabeth, can I ask a question about the simulator? So we've used this the last 2 years. We use the simulator differently, and so do we know how we're going to use it this year, or is that being developed?
It is being developed, of course. I think that what we were intending is starting with a balanced budget and letting people allocate or reallocate expenditure authority up or down in order to get to a different balanced budget should they choose to go that direction. Whereas last year, you're right, we started with a budget that was out of balance, and that doesn't reflect our status right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So here is a proposed calendar. I suppose we should slot in the June 1st follow-up meeting. And those are just another format for displaying those dates for the resident engagement in June. And then for July and August, this has changed a little bit since our April meeting. That notification date is July 20th, which is also a Tuesday. And that's the Tuesday that we are planning on presenting the budget. And then there is an interest in having an evening public hearing, and we have moved that to August 3rd. And then our third public hearing is August 17th. And then the final public hearing is the 24th. And this will be the one that's in the formal notice in the newspaper, that August 24th meeting, and that's when the budget will be adopted.
Hey, Elizabeth,
Sure.
real quick. I hate to be that guy, but if August 3rd is the evening meeting, That's also primary election day.
Oh, see, that's why we have these meetings. I hadn't even thought of that angle. So what sounds like, how about, is this a good item to come up with some ideas and get back together next week?
Well, and Vice Mayor, help me out with this. One of the reasons why we changed the schedule just a little bit is if there are proposed amendments to the budget, staff has time to include those amendments. If we did the third public hearing in the evening, then if there's any changes coming from the public, would that give you guys enough time to make any budget or amended adjustments before the final on the 24th?
Yeah, I guess that's an option. But initially we had the evening meeting on the 27th, July 27th, but that's a fifth Tuesday, so I wanted to be mindful of that. It's stretched out because we have to adopt after August 20th. So before, we had to do it before. So maybe this is something to think about and we can figure out next week. Does that sound okay?
Asking because people voting and want to make, I mean, what time do the polls close? 6?
Polls close at 7. I would just hate to, one, I'm appreciative. I would just hate folks to be like, well, I want to go vote,
Yeah.
but.
Yeah.
at the
Yeah,
meeting-
well, and alternatively, we could do August 10th, 17th, and 24th, because we have the 10th as an off week.
Oh, okay.
How's that sound?
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Good.
Two.
Okay, so August 10th is in the PM, right? And August 17th in AM. Yeah, that would be a lot of community engagement for one day to vote and come to a public hearing. I mean, we're up for it, but.
And just so there is enough time if anything was to come up during the public hearing that we could make amendments to the budget.
We've never let you down. We've always managed to make it work, so.
Yeah, hopefully, because we added this extra meeting, so hopefully this will allow to have the meaningful impact on or feedback on the 10th and the 17th. So by the time you get to the 24th, you don't have to spend still a significant amount of time hearing public feedback.
And it also provides a lot of time between July 20th, when the budget is published, and that public hearing on the 10th. It could also provide, and I don't want to tie up your DAB meetings, but that could be interesting topic for the DAB meetings, should you want to cover the budget in August too, but now that the budget would be out.
Yeah.
So, thinking on our feet. Okay, on to slide number 8. Just recapping the budget process. Tax lid policy direction is important this year. All of our general fund and debt service fund modeling has been based on keeping the mill levy flat for the 28th consecutive year, but direction otherwise is important for us to receive. We're going to continue on with community engagement, and the budget calendar has changed a little bit. So those are the main differences this year with the budget process. So now we'll move into an update on the general fund. So we provided a preliminary model on April 8th. That was relatively early in the process. We have the process for departments to provide options and to update the budget, and we had just been initiating that process. So we've been updating our projections with the most recent data. I actually updated our revenue projection last night at 8 o'clock based on some information I got. So, I mean, it's a very dynamic revenue environment still, and so it keeps us on our feet. ARPA funding and eligibility are much clearer than they were on April 8th. The interim rule was published a few weeks ago, so we know much more than we did then. And then we've been developing budget options during that time. So this is just a recap of where we were in April. We expected a slight surplus this year, a smaller surplus in 22, and then a deficit in the third year, which is pretty typical of our modeling at this point in the process. And if you'll remember back to the budget that was adopted last year, it had a deficit in the third year for the general fund as adopted.
Yep.
So a question on that then. The budget for last year had a deficit in the third year. However, the actual for last year was a surplus. Thus, did the deficit for the third year change?
So the year in the budget that had the deficit last year that was adopted was 2022. And so as we roll forward a year, usually some of that, as revenue projections become clearer, and also we update all of our expenditure assumptions based on current employee demographics, that's usually where we see differences. The other thing too, if you'll remember back a few weeks ago, you received the pension actuarial information, and that changes the pension rates for 22 and 23. So that's definitely of benefit to the general fund.
Yeah, I guess my question is the 5.8 million deficit perceived in 23, was that the same amount that was perceived last year during this process as well?
No, it probably was higher. The 23 deficit was probably higher when it was the second out year than when it's just the first out year.
Okay, because we had, what was it, 4 million in the black instead of doing 5 million deficit spending that we thought we were going to project last year. So I just want to make sure that that's included in this, and this isn't based off an old model.
Yeah, so this is pretty typical of where we start, I would say. And you'll see on the next slide, what we've done here is we've included the entire ARPA planning period, which is through 24. So that's why there's an NA under April 8th for 24, because we didn't include that in the planning period at that time. So what you notice is the same trend at the bottom. So the current year has a surplus, the next year is balanced, and then the following year has a deficit, and then the year after that is a larger deficit. I mean, that's just typical of having expenditures that grow faster than revenue, which is our operating environment. So are you ready for me to move on? Okay. So these next two slides match the major categories that are in your handout on the first page. So just a brief overview of those categories. The first category is one that we talked about on April 8th, which is recommendations to strategically fill vacant positions. These are all non-commissioned positions. We talked about that last time. The second category is also one that we talked about on April 8th, which is some items that were eliminated last year in response to the pandemic, so reinstating those services. The third option is ideas that departments provided to us during the budget process. We call those program options. The next three categories, one of them is budget initiatives. Those are larger, significant programmatic changes that are aligned with City Council goals. Capital projects, this one is related to a proposal to allocate our ARPA funding, some of the ARPA funding, to capital projects to cash fund those in order to enhance general fund sustainability over a longer period of time. And the third category is community investments concepts. And these are some big ideas. They're to enhance the long-term sustainability of our community, and they're aligned with ARPA guidelines. So I guess what I'll point out here is even when we receive a large allocation of funding, our dreams and wishes exceed that too, because if you'll notice, our funding is 72 million, but when we total up everything on this list, it's 87. So we still need to sharpen our pencils and prioritize. A little bit about ARPA.
Can you go back to that slide real quick?
Oh, sure.
Seems like,
We're going to talk about all of this, these categories. That's a good part of today's discussion.
Good. I apologize. I tried to get someone from budget down in my office to help me with this earlier this week, and so I'm gonna have a lot of questions. I was unsuccessful in doing that. So if we're gonna jump deeper into this, then please continue.
Yeah. Yeah, this is more of a table of contents, for lack of a better term. So our overall allocation is $72.4 million. That interim final rule was released on May 10th. They're looking for feedback from local and state governments. The comment period is through July 16th, which is about the same time we will be printing the budget. Funds, one clarification that has been made that's significantly different than the CARES Act is funds can be obligated through December 31st. So that's to say that we need to be under contract or have a purchase order or something along those lines rather than the cash being out the door. And then the funding needs spent by December 31, 2026. This is a calculation that we have done based on our interpretation of the interim final rule. We're always looking for more feedback, and that comes to us daily. But there's 4 broad categories in ARPA. One of them is for provision of government services. And it requires that a local government do an entity-wide look back at revenue compared to your last year before COVID, which in our case was 2019. So entity-wide means all of our funds, excluding water, sewer, and transit, because that's part of their rules. So this doesn't mean that we're eligible for $169.7 million. What that means is that we have calculated more revenue loss than our allocation. So that means that now this number could change based on what guidance we get. But what this means is at this point, we feel confident that we could use the entire ARPA allocation for the provision of government services, which is a very broad category. So there you go. So since I'm a finance person, I of course want to kick this off with the cannots. The prohibited uses, you cannot, there are different opinions on this provision in the interim rule, but the interim rule states that it cannot be used for a tax reduction or tax increase, or a delay in a tax increase, and that includes tax rates. It cannot be used to pay interest or principal on existing debt. And so that's why we'll be talking about cash funding projects. It can't be used to replenish fund reserves, and it cannot be used to pay settlements or judgments, and it cannot be used to replenish pension funds. It can, however, be used to pay normal payroll contributions associated with pension rates on people's payroll, if that makes sense. That's something we were concerned about. So I said there were 4 big categories. One of them is provision of government services. The other big, broad category is community investments. The community investments category broadly, what they're really, having read through the rule, what they're really interested in is hiring workers, responding to the pandemic, getting businesses back in business again and open, investing in communities that were hardest hit by the pandemic, supporting industries like tourism, travel, and hospitality that were hardest hit. Those are really some broad themes that carry throughout the interim rule. So kind of tying back to the canals, it would be remiss if I didn't bring up some guiding principles that GFOA has provided to us. That's the Professional Association for Government Financial People. They really caution governments from creating new programs or adding or expanding existing programs since the funding is non-sustainable through 2024. So really, if you're expanding or creating new programs, you need to have a funding model in place for 2025. 2 other bullets to be mindful of. is to beware of state and other local government ARPA initiatives. I know by watching council meetings, we have a lot of them at the city of Wichita ourselves, especially housing initiatives, and that the state of Kansas has received ARPA funding, as has Sedgwick County. So coordinating with them so that we can complement each other's work rather than duplicate efforts. So back to having more dreams than funding. The handout that you've been provided has about $15 million more in possible funding, possible uses for the funding than we have capacity in our allocation. I'd like to point out 2 options in the handout that can enhance stability of the general fund in the long term. One of them is a little more complex than the other. The first one is to set aside a reserve of this funding for 2023 and 2024 to potentially cover any deficits the general fund might have at that time. At this point, the revenue environment is so uncertain that, I mean, just looking back a year ago, 18 months ago, things change day by day. I think that there is some value in setting aside that funding until then. If we don't need it to stabilize the general fund at that time, we could reconsider using that for community investments or capital projects. So just to have that in reserve. And that aligns with one of GFOA's recommendations is you have really 6 years to spend all of this, pace yourselves. The other one is to fund capital projects with cash. So that would be to fund capital projects that are in the CIP with $23 million, and that would allow a mill levy shift to the general fund. And the impact to the general fund would be an additional $2 million annually starting in 2022. So it's not a one-to-one correlation in that first year, but over the life of the potential debt service for the project, it would really do a lot to enhance the sustainability of the general fund. So we have modeled the general fund here. The top line is what was a few slides ago, and we've layered in the capital project funding and then that reserve for the last 2 years. And so what you'll see is that we have a slight surplus in 23, and then what I consider to be a manageable deficit in 2024. So in conclusion, just like the last 10 years, initial feedback and budget on these budget options will inform the resident engagement and development of the budget. So we have not solidified, we're developing the simulator, but we still have time and room to include some topics in there that are of interest to you, and the same is true of the social media town hall. Direction on your interest in using ARPA for capital projects will help facilitate CIP development. And then thirdly, guidance on community investments and budget initiatives will shape longer-term budget development, and we would anticipate that that would require, of course, some research and engaging with community partners on what that would look like over the long term.
So before we start stepping into the details, are there any questions you have about this general overview? The tax lid, ARPA, our current position, anything like that?
I have a question on slide 22, right there. I think, isn't that revised general fund, that 1.7, shouldn't that be a positive number? Or am I not?
Maybe it should be, let me see.
Yeah, because your project funding.
Yeah, I think it should be.
16.
It should be a positive number, right?
Yeah, because 2.6 plus 6, 3.2 minus 1.5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make a big difference, but it's just a swing.
No.
I mean, it's still a lot of money.
Yeah, I'll fix that up.
Okay. And then, can you go back one more slide, please? Okay, so maybe I'll understand this better as we go through, but can you explain those two options, or is it two options or three options?
It's two.
Okay,
Which one? The reserve first or the capital projects? Which one?
Doing both.
yeah,
Okay, let's do them both. Okay.
So what's the 30.6 compared to the,
That's the total of both of them. So
oh, if
five-
you add those
Yeah,
two
yeah, yeah.
options together?
You bet.
Got you.
Maybe I should have indented
I-
those two bullets below. Right. So the first one is simply
That's
because
not even right.
the revenue, it's reserving some of the spending until 23 and 24. And then the second one is funding, and this is in the handout, it's using cash to fund some projects that are already programmed in the CIP but haven't been initiated yet in order to shift to $500,000
Okay,
over a longer period of time.
and these aren't necessarily or options. We could look at them together, which is what you're saying.
Yeah, you could do them separate. They're together because they both enhance sustainability.
Okay, thank you.
That's why they're together. Anything else?
Are you taking into account the changes at the legislative level with sales tax from online sales, which is projected to increase our budget about $500,000 a year? Is that added in?
Yeah, we're updating. I've modeled sales tax projections based on the current year to date. We get monthly distributions, and then I've included, the model includes taxable retail sales estimates from Wichita State. So,
Does it vary from the budget office in Topeka? My understanding is the fiscal note from the tax plan that was passed and vetoed, then overrode, is as a projection of $500,000 more dollars coming into Wichita with the sales tax. Now that we're taxing stuff online, if they're using this projection and you are using Wichita State's projection, is there a difference between the two, or
I mean,
much of one?
If that change has already happened, then it would be reflected in our model because
Okay.
we get sales tax every month. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so,
It's not
but
like-
Wichita
it's
State
not
would
like
then use that data.
No, we would use it moving forward. So then then I take what we are currently getting every month for the last 5 months, and then I look forward using the growth on that. So-
Okay, this would probably take place, I think, July 1st,
Okay.
because it's a new
Yeah.
law, so.
I would say at this point, there's enough variability in the sales tax projections that I can certainly add 500,000 to them, but we have enough variability from month to month that I don't know how material that would be at this point.
For the general fund, it'd be about 250,000. And we'd always used a ballpark of about $1 million for increase. Half of that goes to the CIP under the referendum that was approved by the public, and that goes for streets. And the other half goes to the general fund for property tax relief. And so if that's true, and it was $1 million for a whole year, assuming that's the case, it's 250,000 in the general fund for the first year.
Excellent.
If there are not other questions on the overview, what I'd like to do then is step through this handout that has the budget retreat items. And Elizabeth, if you stay at the podium,
Okay.
you can
All
help
right. You bet.
work through this.
Sorry.
Yep. So the first page is a summary, and it talks about the various categories that we're going to then drill down into as we go through the document. The one is filling current vacancies, and that's the general fund hiring, and you've got a list on that, and we'll talk about those in a minute. We have reinstatements of services that had been deleted as we were trying to balance during the COVID pandemic this time last year. We have some new program options for you to take a look at, and these were requested by the departments, and normally I would make some determination and give you a recommendation, but at this point in the budget process, thought it'd be good for you to talk through some of these program options to give us direction on how we would go forward. So again, trying to be a little more transparent and allow more involvement by the council early on in the process. And then there are some budget initiatives that we have been talking about as a staff for the last several months, and have brought those to you to also discuss. And then I'm going to let the budget office and Mark talk about the capital projects a little bit, and how the projects that are listed for your consideration, if we go to ARPA cash funding, that actually gives us more flexibility in the general fund, and we'll talk about that. And then the last piece of it is what I know you've had a lot of discussions within the community, and that's community investments. And at this point, we've built the budget around $20 million going to community investments. But as indicated by Elizabeth, we're 15 million short, right, if we do all of these things. So you just keep that in the back of your mind. Again, I'm going to go through all of these, answer all the questions you have, but I'd like to have a discussion after we've been through all the categories. So with that, if we go to the second page, we believe that we have the ability to fund in the general fund about 139 positions that are currently held vacant. And actually, if I remember right, the only thing that isn't addressed are some vacant positions in street maintenance, and we're working through that right now. I told you this has been pretty dynamic, this process, and we're trying to get the right balance between what our crews do and what we do under the increasing contract amount for street maintenance. And the CIP includes additional dollars over the next several years for the contractual street maintenance. So trying to hit that sweet spot in terms of what we do with staff and what we do on the contractual basis.
Bob, I have
Yes.
a question. And if we chose to fill those positions, would there be callbacks of some sort for employees that were let go?
Some employees will be entitled to that, right? It depends on the contract and also the relationship we had with the employee, but yes, we always give preference to a rehire. And so this is the dollar consequence of filling these positions. You had asked for a list of the positions being under consideration, and we've given those to you.
Are all these positions deemed necessary, or are they just vacant and we're filling holes?
Yeah, as we talked about during the first retreat, the idea was to be systematic about this. So every department was asked to prioritize their vacant positions. So from the top, in terms of most mission critical, down to the bottom, recognizing that those in the bottom would probably not get funded. And we then worked in our office on reviewing those, had those costed out by the budget office, and then went back to the staff. And we've had some trade-offs, so this should reflect what the top priorities are for each department in terms of moving forward with their critical services.
And are they listed in order of priority? Is that what you're,
They're listed by range. Does that make sense?
by salary range?
Or, yeah, by job classification.
Okay, so it doesn't
Yeah,
have
in case
anything to
you're
do with.
wondering, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a question about community service rep supervisor. Is that a position that's currently not filled for the manager's office?
That's correct, it's vacant.
Who's supervising our community folks now then?
There's an interim.
We have the
No.
District 3 person who's in that interim position and also doing the District 3 work.
She's pulling a lot.
So, manager, back to, I
Yes.
think, so if there was a position, when you did the analysis of the organization, if there was an open position and you believed it wasn't critical to the organization, did it stay on the list?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. It stays vacant.
But is it on this list?
If it's not a second.
Or-
If we're not recommending filling it, it's not on this list.
Okay, all right, so there were some positions, or potentially there were some positions.
There's probably,
A lot.
yeah.
Okay, all right, that answers
It's
my
a- it's a
question.
lot.
Probably at least double this number.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
but
what
I
we've
think-
tried to do is give to you a recommendation on sustainable positions. So given our projections for the next several years, what can we guarantee will be, we can fund as filled and fill vacant positions as they become vacant. So in other words, if a position becomes vacant tomorrow, we intend to fill that position or allow the department to trade that position out for one of the other positions that they may deem to be higher priority in their organization.
Okay, thank you.
But at this point, we can't recommend all of these, we can't recommend initiatives and filling all of the vacant positions.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So, Mr. Manager, is a recommendation to staff the council office with someone who's not an interim? Did that make it onto this list?
Well, that position shows it's not being vacant, so it's not in this analysis, right?
So it's not being vacant because there's an interim there.
Correct,
and
right.
Is the interim's position vacant, or has that been two positions mushed into one?
That's the interim was the position that the District 3 representative has been filling right now.
Which is the community service rep supervisor.
Correct. Right.
Okay, so the interim who is assisting the council, if this goes, would stay with the council, and that position would be replaced. We would have to budget for a new position to fulfill the service rep supervisor. So the interim now would no longer be interim.
Correct.
Does she know that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So just briefly, some of the positions on this list, like if you go to MAPCD, those are ones that I think we heard back from you in April that you're interested in moving forward with hiring those. So we incorporated that feedback, or that feedback was incorporated in the framework for reviewing the requests from departments. So, and there's also quite a few animal control positions on the second page as well.
Those neighborhood inspectors, it says combination neighborhood inspector, is that
It's that's the actual job title.
that's
So-
just their title? They are just, not just, they are our neighborhood inspectors
They
that we
yeah.
are used
Yeah,
to
that's
dealing
the
with.
job title, so.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to translate the HR job title, and we've done that on some of these. We've typed in what people call them versus the official job title.
Thank you.
Any other questions there? Okay. The next page, page 3, these reflect what you did at the last retreat, and these are adds back into the budget for services that had been cut during the COVID balancing. And so the only position that hasn't, the action we haven't taken yet is on the early literacy outreach, and we're still working to see if a portion of that or all of that can be provided in cooperation with other agencies. And so we haven't finalized that. The rest were directions from you in terms of the inspector vacancy, the internal auditor vacancy, restoring materials cut in the library budget, and then the changes to forestry and grounds maintenance in parks.
On this list of potential hires, what is the lowest wage on this list?
Probably the library clerk too, I would guess. What do you, Mark? Yeah, I think it's a 6:15. Is it a 6:15 or 6:13?
It's $6.15?
No, that's the
the
range.
classification.
That's the SEIU range.
Thank God, okay.
No, sorry.
And what is that amount? My goal is to make sure folks who work for the city are getting a living wage.
You've stumped me right now off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that back to you
My
by the
apologies.
retreat. It's okay. By the retreat next time.
I'd be interested to know what would, with this list here, if we move forward with it, if these are at least $15 an hour and up positions, and if not, what it would take to ensure that.
I think, I think there's some on here where the first or second step are below $15 an hour, but then as you move through the steps, they're above, is what I remember.
Okay, so just for clarity, on this service reinstatements, for example, there's MABCD inspector vacancy, fill that, but that's also in the
The other
position
list.
list.
Yep, that's true.
So are we, so is this, with these service reinstatements, should they be less?
Are some of them duplicate?
Yeah.
I think actually the amount on page 2, I netted those out that were double counted.
Okay, so
Yeah.
all right.
The
So this is-
1.9 million, I think, is net of the MABCD inspector and the auditor.
And the auditor, okay. And then how about, is grounds maintenance, is that people or equipment?
That's the contract. So
Con-
that's
oh.
increasing the frequencies on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
contract for right-of-way mowing.
Yep.
That was an option last year.
Okay.
So those are the, number 2 and number 3 are the, well, no, sorry. Number 2, 3, and 4 are the only ones that involve people.
Thank
But
you.
number 2 is not on the hiring list at this
Okay.
point. Anything else on page 3?
Okay. So page 4 are program options. And these are items that need to be considered as part of the budget going forward. And I'll go through some of these and then ask for Elizabeth for her help as well. We have a SAFER grant in the fire department that is funding 12 firefighters, if I remember correctly, and providing a truck company, a 5th truck company in Northeast Wichita. This would provide the funding necessary to continue those through the general fund when the grant expires. So, and that would start in 2022.
Right. The amount in 22 is prorated because the grant's through February, so.
That's 12 positions?
12 positions, yes.
Have we heard back from at all? I know it wouldn't be reflective in a budget because it wouldn't be coming out of our funds right now for that SAFER grant that was to fund for 4 years, an additional 12 positions.
I don't believe we've heard anything on the SAFER grant.
At the back yet? Okay.
I don't know if you want to go through each of these. We have a significant amount of work that's being done on, in the law department on diversions that is being handled by an attorney, and we can actually put the attorney to better work in the diversion program if we put a clerk position in that operation as well. So this adds a clerk to, and just to give you an idea on the volume of work, there's about almost 3,800 diversion applications that are received by the prosecutor's office. So that's just discussed in number 10. Number 11 is an issue that has become one of equity and concerns, especially during the pandemic, and that is the library has had a policy for hold fees, and obviously that has been more necessary since the libraries haven't been open, and the library board and staff have recommended that the hold fees be eliminated going forward so that it doesn't have a negative impact on folks who can't get materials in their own branch libraries especially, but can still receive them from the other libraries when they're delivered to theirs. As we ramp back up, we have a need for circulation position, and that's recognized in item number 12. And I think that's at the Advanced Learning Library, if I remember right.
Right, that's correct.
Yep. The policy question about the Walters branch, right now we planned on operating it at the same hours as Linwood did previously, as 35 hours, 5 days a week. Question is, now that it has been expanded and has more to offer, should those hours be expanded to 48 hours, 6 days a week?
Is that what our other branches are? Is that to bring it in line with our other branches?
I think Angelou, if I remember right, is at the 35.5, and I think
the other branches might be at slightly more than 48. So I think what they've aligned this would be with having one more position. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? If they, not overextending themselves, but if one position would get them this many more hours. And then also provide additional services for the service area.
Yeah, we can get that to you. I think each category of branch has different hours, right?
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine. I'm good.
Number 14 is reflective of an expense that we're experiencing in '21, and that's because of the activity on demolitions. We actually are going to run out of money, and so this asks to cover demolitions that are in the pipeline, and it would add another $61,000 to the budget in '21.
We don't see a trend that could continue beyond 21?
Well, again, we want to continue to work the program, and we've had, some success in early notification and getting demolition by the private property owner. If we continue to follow that process, at this time, they didn't ask for additional funds.
Okay.
Number 15, request from the Parks Department. Because there's been a significant rise in the use of parks during COVID, they've had a hard time keeping it up on the refuse collection. This item would allow for, I think, additional staff and an additional truck?
Right, that's right. So,
Okay. All right.
yep. Do you want me to take the next one?
Yeah. Number 16 is we have old equipment that needs to be replaced, chippers and a stump grinder in the forestry division, and we've got, and they're not covered under the equipment replacement fund. The chippers are 17 and 18 years old, the stump grinder is 16 years old. So it's a matter of function as well as safety in that regard. In police, there's been an audit that's been performed of our performance of property and evidence, and as a result of that, the department wants to make sure that we have the appropriate security and handling of materials there, and so they have recommended additional staffing. This would implement the first phase of that, putting 2 new positions in property and evidence. Number 18 reflects what we hear from some of you on a somewhat frequent basis, and that is that concern about alleyway cleanups. And this would provide additional funding, just $25,000 a year to be able to do some alleyway cleanups that we can't handle today. And I think a lot of this has to do with hazardous materials in the alleys. So, number 19, it has to do with purchase of software in order for us to better process our right-of-way permits. We have over 8,000 of those a year that are processed by engineering. It's a web-based system, and again, help use technology. It's a one-time purchase, that $189, and then we'd be fine after that. And then number 20 has to do with continuing to try to improve our performance in the call center, and it has to do with making some changes in terms of, I think, technology as well as staffing in order to try to improve performance, reduce busy signals, and wait times. Any questions on the program options? And again, at this point, these are items that are under consideration, requested by the departments, but as everything that's on this list, this is fluid, it's for your discussion. We're not asking you to lock in on any specific thing, but give us more guidance and ask questions.
So these are all new additions, staff additions, but I don't see any lost some staff positions in some of these processes.
And not in these, no, no.
So just
Again,
add-
because we're down positions, right?
But even like on this number 19 with this engineering software, that would help speed up permits, and we're not seeing any reduction in staff.
Yeah, well, I think what their angle there is to allow staff that should be out in the field to be out in the field doing the inspections and the engineering work rather than reconciling the payments and that sort of work.
But again, these would all be over and above the 139 vacant positions, correct?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Glad you recommended next Tuesday again.
Page 6 has to do with some budget initiatives that, the first one, you obviously should recognize that's the last phase of the police staffing study, and so that has a price tag of about $700,000 if that were to be implemented in 2022.
And then according to the study, our police would be fully funded?
That would meet, yes. Say fully funded, that would provide all the positions that were recommended in the staffing study, yep. 22 recognizes that we're currently looking at staffing, equipment, and station needs in the fire department. And so this would put $1 million in for the next 3 years to go ahead and give us a start on implementing recommendations. This is assuming that there'll be new needs. We don't know what the magnitude will be, but we thought it was important to at least start the funding process for it. And of course, we'll revisit that next year.
So that $1 million for this side will be, they can access that as soon as the data starts to come up.
Correct.
They need more resources.
Right. Number 23 is a program that we've talked about a little bit. It has to do with what we call the Violence Interrupter program, targeted primarily towards youth offenders, high-risk youth, and those who've also been victims of crime, youth who've been victims of crime. We are seeking outside funding for this program, but this $500,000 would allow us to do work in the police department and in other departments such as housing, transit. I think there's 2 other players, I can't remember offhand, but in order to be able to head and start this program up. And then the number 24 is the reserve that was referenced by Elizabeth a little while ago in terms of trying to give us some cushion to cover any deficit positions using ARPA funds, or then again have those available if we turn out to be okay from a budgetary standpoint. Any questions on any of that? The next slide, I'll let Elizabeth and Mark talk about.
Do you want to handle it?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the next page, I'm sorry.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. I wanted to address your question real quick, Councilmember Claycomb, on vacancies. I have the advantage of being able to listen and not have to do anything and think of the answer while they're up here. So I think you asked about positions being vacant now. Of course, this dynamic and changes on a daily basis, but the last number I saw was we had about 450, and this is 139 of those. Now, the 450 is fluid. That's going to include part-times and seasonals, and to Councilmember Fry's point, it's also going to include positions that, due to technology and activity levels, we probably wouldn't fill anyway, but that'll give you a little perspective on number of positions.
Hold on, Mark. While we're answering questions, just want to answer a mayor's question. The clerk 1 position that is in here in the vacancy list is $12.27 an hour, and the clerk 2 position is $13.37. So those will be your lowest on this list. Yeah, it'll depend on the group that they're in. If they are non-represented, then we have the ability to do that. If they're represented, then that's part of our negotiation process with the unions, SEIU, police and fire, and Teamsters for that matter. And then, of course, we always have to look at the impact. You and I have talked about that before. Look at the impact on the positions above as well. There's a ripple effect.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the administration side of this, and I trust you all with that. Would it be proper then for us to set aside $200,000 to be used in order to increase the pay of folks who are making less than the livable wage, and you all can, the administrative side can do whatever needs to be done to bring that up? Is that the best way to do it?
Yeah, that's a policy discussion, right? And you're right. If it's a matter of what does it take to get us to $15 an hour at our lowest position, I think for this next year, based on a reduced employment base, it would be about $200,000 in the general fund, right? If I remember correctly.
Fair for me. So would be interested in that. I don't know. My understanding is there will be some more administrative stuff for that, and our job is to more oversee the funds. So, but I think we dig ourselves in a deeper hole to continue to hire people without paying them a livable wage.
Okay, the manager wanted me to explain the concept that we've talked about a little bit here about shifting the mill levy between the debt service fund and the general fund. You may recall we've done that several times over the last few years. In fact, we did it for 21 and 22 last year at this time in order to benefit the general fund. Basically, to determine the amount of CIP projects we can do, it's really a function of the mill levy rate in the debt service fund, then our debt metrics, which you're familiar with. We don't want to spend more than 66% of our revenue on debt, and that creates our capacity in the debt service fund. So if we reduce the mill levy in the debt service fund, the benefit is that we make the general fund more sustainable. We create an ongoing flow in the general fund of about $2 million a year. In order to be able to afford that, we have to reduce projects in the debt service fund. That's the concept. What we've suggested here is if you want to make the general fund more sustainable and shift a mill or half mill back to the general fund, we need to reduce projects. ARPA provides us the opportunity to then backfill those projects so there's no consequence to the CIP. Now, another beauty of the ARPA funding for capital improvement projects, it will also allow us to accelerate those projects. Most of the ones we selected in the material here are scheduled from 22 to 24. Cash flow is not as much of an issue with the ARPA funds, so we would actually have the ability to accelerate those maybe a year or two in some cases. Of course, the other option is just to fund supplemental projects with the ARPA funds. If you do that, though, you will not be able to move the mill levy into the general fund. But obviously, if that was a policy direction, that would be a choice too. And I'll also point out finally, one reason that the projects that we've identified are on this list is they also meet ARPA categories. So we use that as kind of a backstop for why we selected the projects on there. But again, that's the concept. And Mayor, I'm going to tie that into a question you asked Elizabeth on the slide about why the 2023 general fund deficit was larger. One reason it's larger is because that's when the half mil would come from the general fund to the debt service fund. So that's why that deficit in that year was larger than the prior years. This move would not require that move to be made, which would make that 2023 general fund budget look better. So I apologize. I know it's confusing, transferring between the two funds and confusing the operating budget and the CIP, but that's the general concept. Use ARPA funds to reduce our capital improvement projects, which allows you to generate an additional $2 million a year into the general fund.
So number 26 would be the library branch plan that we saw, was that last year?
Yes, sir. That's Westlink. It's my
Angela.
Yes, thank you. And it's Rockwell, and it's Alfred. Yes, sir.
So is the CLAP master plan just too far out to be included in this?
I don't recall what year that's in, but we did not include it in this material.
That would go back to what Mark talked about, and that is a special project. It doesn't have the same financial impact, right? But if you wanted, that is what I think you could say that it's a regional attraction, has the potential to be a regional attraction. So if you're going to add projects that are not in the CIP right now, I'd like to put them under the tourism umbrella, so to speak. That would be the justification for those. We've got another project that we've also been talking about, the South Lakes, that is also a potential benefit from a regional standpoint.
What about restoring something that was in the capital plan and then removed? That's a tourism regional project like Crystal Prairie Lake.
That's another possibility, yep.
Okay.
So Mark, just to be clear, we could make this move, but eventually, is there a long-term effect of doing that? I mean, at some point, we'll get back to what that looks like in 2023 now, where we have to move the mill back, how much, is that, how many mills is that?
I would tell you this, and obviously long-term planning is dicey, but really you should consider that you're making a 10-year commitment because the debt service on $23 million is, to use super simple math, let's say $2 million a year for 10 years. I mean, that's the concept.
Okay, so we wouldn't see those long-term effects, and by that, I mean, and it's really difficult to predict 10 years, but we wouldn't see that, that deficit in a couple of years because of this. You're saying 10 years.
You would generate a cash flow into the general fund of $2 million a year for at least 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
You said
sir.
you never want to pay more than 66% of your revenue toward debt.
Right.
Where are we at now? What is our debt load?
I think the last time we reported, we were at about 49%, if I remember correctly. I'm going off memory, but we report that to you every year in the CIP, and we also report that in the quarterly report, which actually is coming up next Tuesday. So
Yeah, that's
I'll
a
make sure-
council-adopted benchmark.
There you go. The answer
I'm
next
learning
Tuesday.
all sorts of things all at once.
I'm anticipating.
I'll add a slide for next Tuesday for you. How's that?
Thank you.
He wanted to know where we
A
were.
lot of
on our
moving
benchmark.
pieces with CIP.
And we'll see it on Tuesday. So, okay, I just want to make sure I understand.
Right.
So this is another way to put this is that we would backfill CIP projects with ARPA.
Yes, that's exactly
Okay.
right. You are 100% correct. That's
On a
what
cash-
is
on a cash
recommended in
basis.
this.
Yeah, on a cash basis.
Which is what you and I have talked about previously,
Right,
right?
yep.
I thought so.
Now, another option, not to go too far down the road, but you could backfill projects with ARPA and, again, not move the mill levy if that was the policy direction that you wanted to do, which would, but that's not what's proposed here. What
Yeah.
we're proposing is backfilling projects, creating a cash flow for the general fund to make it more sustainable.
Yeah,
So
okay.
is there a cap on this? I mean, you've got 23 million for this. Why not more if that's the case?
Right.
Because of the lists on the other pages.
Yeah, 'cause we
On
only
the other
have-
pages, but then
Yeah.
we still have, yeah.
'Cause
which
we
is
only
the-
have 72
The last
million.
page we haven't got to.
Right, and for instance, if you look at page 6 and the ARPA reserve that Elizabeth talked about, if that reserve's not needed for
Right.
operations, then that's another $12
$12
million total that would be available for
Right,
capital.
and the 20 million on the last page that we haven't gotten to.
Again, if you decide not to do community initiatives.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, all of this is fluid.
Everything today is fluid.
Yeah. Right,
right.
So that's the whole idea, is to have a good discussion.
This is
So-
just like a starting place, right?
Exactly.
And that was
But
kinda
we
like-
wanted to have the information out there for you and kind of to talk through. I do want to get to the community investments piece
Sure.
if we get through the CIP piece. So there has been a lot of discussion about how can this money also be used to help the community address the negative economic impact created by the pandemic and position us strategically for moving forward. These are 4 ideas. Please don't react to these other than that's just we're throwing some things out that have been discussed in the community to this point. There are things that are not on this list that have also been discussed by the community. So I know that you're going to bring your own priorities to this, but I'll just tell you what we put together as a $20 million community investment piece. The first is $5 million to fund the Affordable Housing Fund that was discussed as part of the Places for People plan. And that was one of the recommendations during the incentives discussion about how do we move forward in actually encouraging, on a short-term basis, new construction in the core. And the recommendation from the consultant was to create an affordable housing fund at $5 million, to start off with at $5 million. So that's the first, and that's very consistent with the guidelines and what we're seeing other cities do, because the gap is growing in terms of the cost of construction versus what families can afford, especially with the pandemic and the rising construction costs. Second one, there's been a lot of talk about the negative impact that the pandemic has had on small business, and so this would put aside $5 million to assist in small business development and growth. Now, again, it had to be within the guidelines, and there are no programs attached to this. This is a broad category, so if you decided you wanted to assist small business, then you would have the freedom to determine what that looks like, maybe solicit proposals from agencies, others that play in the small business area, and the same with entrepreneurial development. The third has to do with recognizing that our manufacturing community or industries have been hard hit as a result of the pandemic, and that to rebuild those industries as they were before the pandemic probably doesn't make sense long term, and that to prevent us from becoming quote unquote another Detroit, we ought to look at what it's going to take to help our manufacturing businesses our manufacturing industry adapt and grow and change so they're competitive going forward, which then leads to job creation. And so this would fund possibly a smart manufacturing initiative, which has been started at WSU, but it would allow for that for an expansion of that. You could also look at some work that's been done on digital transformation. These are just two ideas that have been discussed in the community that could be transformative. And again, we have to be careful, and you have to be able to show the negative impact of the pandemic before you could justify these expenses. And then the last one has to do with workforce development and training, not necessarily a continuation of and more money for what we've been doing, but looking at new and unique ways, possibly dovetailing with number 31. So what do you do to train our workforce for the emerging technology needs, the changes in the new economy jobs that we're going to have in the area. It also probably will talk about, another initiative that you could look at are for those that have been chronically unemployed or underemployed, and those folks probably have been hurt the most by the pandemic, and are there unique initiatives that we could do, that we can undertake in partnership with others in order to put people back to work. Again, these are out there for discussion. They didn't originate with us. They are things that have been discussed already by others in the community, but it's a starting point just so that you have something to shoot at and to talk about.
So Greater Wichita Partnership and others have been involved in these
Partnership has been involved in actually the discussion of all four of these initiatives. There have been other people that have fed into those discussions beyond the partnership. No one's come forward with a priority list yet. These are just ideas, and so we thought we might as well get them out there.
Are you done?
Yes.
So along those lines, we talk about other ARPA funding, state, county, et cetera.
Right.
Are these concepts been discussed with them, or are these our portion of it, or are they thinking along these lines as well?
So the county has been involved in the discussions. There's been no discussion whether or not they'll be a partner, but the discussion, the ask from the business community, for instance, has been that they partner. Also having discussions with the Department of Commerce, with the Secretary of Commerce. And he's indicated that he wants to do some things to help jumpstart the manufacturing sector here in our region. Have they committed to these four initiatives? No, not necessarily, but they are involved in the discussions.
Have they brought up other initiatives that have they tested the waters with us on other initiatives?
The county has brought forward homelessness and mental health issues.
Yeah. I've had conversations with 2 county commissioners who hope that we can align with them on something with mental health.
Right.
So Bob, can you talk a little bit more about 31,
Yeah.
smart manufacturing, digital transformation? I mean, I think the first one, the second one, and the fourth one are ones that I've been hearing consistently throughout the community. I've met with the top 15 manufacturing CEOs in our community over the past year, and none of them mentioned smart manufacturing, so I'm not sure what this is. Has Wichita State in this? Are we giving money to Wichita State to continue something that they're working on? What would this look like?
Yeah, so there's a smart manufacturing center at WSU that's been developed by Deloitte, and also WSU is involved in that. And you have students that are part of that process, so it's part of the learning process as well as working. They're working with Spirit. I know that for sure. I don't know if they're working with Textron, but the idea is to work with not just the large manufacturers, but also the supply chain on robotics, AI, and there are other technologies that I'm not sure I understand. Scott, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. But the idea is to kind of use that as an R&D location where they are assisting our manufacturers in determining how they're going to move forward in order to stay relevant with the manufacturing process, recognizing it's changing around the globe right now, right? And so the way that you manufacture today is not going to keep you competitive 5 or 10 years down the road.
I mean, that's where my confusion comes from. It seems like it's a Wichita State program. Are we just helping to assist in the funding of a Wichita State program because it has an economic benefit for all of us, or is that a good description of this?
You would determine the strings attached to the dollars. There's a regional ask of $25 million just for the Smart Manufacturing Center. So that means that if you put 5, for instance, into it, they need to identify 20 from industry, other probably governmental funding partners, and maybe even Deloitte themselves. WSU would probably kick in money as well. They'd probably go after EDA grants. I think there'll be a significant amount of funding. But again, if you're going to do this, you determine what you believe is the most appropriate use of those funds that moves us forward in partnership with others. But there may be, for instance, when I talked about workforce development, I think it's important that we do something in a different way that addresses people that maybe we haven't been able to reach before, as well as those who we want to thrive in the new economy as we go forward.
No, that one makes sense, and then we have complete control over what programs we utilize, and there are programs that we utilize with the community. Same thing with small business and entrepreneur development and affordable housing. It's just, I understand the smart manufacturing, digital transformation, but I also understand it's a Wichita State program. And I get it that we all benefit, so I'm just trying to figure out what our role is, or how we would add to this, I guess. What?
Bob, could I make
Right.
just a quick comment?
Sure.
And normally with conversations I've had with community leaders, they talk more about advanced manufacturing.
Right.
So that's a term that resonates with me more. But one of the things that I think people are excited about when they're talking about smart manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, is that it would help us to diversify the economy.
Right.
And it obviously applies to aerospace, but then also more of an emphasis in medical, pharmaceutical, and focusing on processes of how we use the skilled labor we have, maybe figure out how to upskill, reskill them. But it would just help in the long run, our hope to diversify the economy and take us from just thinking about aerospace manufacturing.
And playing on that, the digital transformation piece of that is even more relevant in that regard, because it's meant to create another version of NIAR. NIAR is on the aviation side. This would create a similar R&D type of operation for other industries, other manufacturers that are not aviation related. And so again, it helps in terms of diversification.
But it's just the Wichita State Department we're funding.
Right now, it's talking about being housed at Wichita State as part of the Innovation Campus.
Okay.
Right. And their ask is not that it be fully funded by somebody else. This is a contribution towards, this is to help get it going, get it started.
And the money we give to Wichita State every year can't go towards that?
The mill levy?
Yeah.
Mill levy right now is pledged towards a number of things, scholarships, debt service for Innovation Campus. Those are probably, debt service is probably the largest, if I remember right, for previous investments.
It looks to me like numbers 30 and 32 would also be with partners. It wouldn't be necessarily the city creating a business accelerator and entrepreneurial program.
Yeah.
And workforce development, I would imagine that we would work with our workforce partners in the community. We just haven't put those names in here. On the smart manufacturing, I think it's further along. We know Wichita State is doing that. They've got that center with Deloitte. So I don't think any of these, maybe the affordable housing would be our program, but even with that, I think we'd need a partner, perhaps. I don't know. But on 30, 31, and 32, we would use partners.
I would agree with that statement. Partners, lots of partners in different programs and different ways that we can adjust. If one program isn't producing results, another one is. You know, we could be agile towards that. It just seemed with Wichita State, it was just one. So that's why I was trying to get into more of this. Are there partners with the number 31, or is it just into one program? I understand it. I just didn't know if there's another way we can fund it or be a better partner with them. And if, you know, we're talking about dedicating as much money to one program, it just seems not as, I guess, diversified as an investment as all the other ones are.
Well, I might argue if we spread out, I'm not advocating for Wichita State, but sometimes when you spread money, you don't get as much impact as when you put money in one area. So I'm not necessarily advocating for this program, even though I think part of the reason Wichita State is mentioned here is because they're the ones that are doing it. No one else is in the region, so it'd be my guess.
How much money are they getting from ARPA?
I apologize, I don't remember. The president told me, but I don't remember the number.
Okay.
And 259 is receiving money, and you know, there's on the, you know, there's one of these that actually could be in partnership with 259 as well, and that has to do with the job training and preparation of high schoolers for the workforce. Again, I don't want to get in deep defense of all of these. I'm just simply saying these have come forward, and you know, just so you have an idea of the ask, the digital transformation has a range of 25 to 50 million, and then you got 25 million on smart manufacturing. So these are big ticket items, and you'd just be a contributing partner and participant in the process.
Yeah, and I'm not against it. I just want to know how to defend it if the other three are going into multiple programs that we can utilize, I guess, or have some control of the shaping of, and one doesn't, then how do I explain that? And that's why we have these meetings and have these discussions.
On top of that, just a reminder, we're still 15 million off, right? So that's assuming you put 20 into community initiatives. You may not do that. And it's,
So you started off this whole thing with maybe having 2 meetings and looking at June 1st. So
yeah.
what are you looking for on June 1st? Will we revisit this in more of the weeds, or?
So if you have the patience, I'd like to go through these pages just to get an initial, hey, that's out of the, I don't want to do that, or I definitely want you to protect this, right?
Okay.
And then I guess I'm looking for further refinement on the first then, so we can try to, and then if you remember what you did last year for us, there were some items that you said, we're not really sure where we want to come down on this. So when you talk to the DABs, when you do the other engagement process, we want you to test these items and get feedback on those. And so that would be the other thing I'd be looking for today, as well as on the first, probably refine on the first. Because again, we start the process on the second in terms of visiting DABs.
And if we chose to recommend funding Table 4 program options, could we line item out a couple of the options there too?
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know if you have anything you want to talk about the positions. I do have a fairly urgent need to get some of these filled, especially those that are dealing with programming and summer activities, such as our maintenance operations, a lot of what's in Parks and Rec. I'm running into some real problems in animal control and in records and Spider in police. But I promised I would hold off on filling any of those until you got a chance to see the list and what are identified as the top priorities.
Are you going to fill the ones that are less than $15 an hour before we are able to have a vote on that?
That's a discussion I'll need from council, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it sounded like there would have to be some more systematic changes on the administration side if we were to, I'd probably delete tier 1 or whatever.
Right. Or if we have some urgency, well, this isn't where you were going, but if we had urgency, we get the positions filled with the understanding that they can elevate the salaries, but, we can, or the policy could be not to bring anyone in at the initial step, bring them in at a step that pays at the $15 rate. So that would be,
We might just attract more different, more motivated people, more experienced people if it was at $15 than hiring at 13 or 12, and then bumping them up in a month when we vote on this stuff. So that was my only thought with this.
I think if you look at what's happening in restaurant industry and some others, you're probably bumping the salaries may be necessary in order to fill some of these positions. I don't believe we're at full staffing on lifeguards for our pools yet. So
True.
Again, it's a salary issue or wage issue.
Do you need guidance on that today, or?
I really like to pull the trigger on these. If you want to wait a week, that's fine, but it's going to really press us in some of these operations.
Well, I meant the wage.
On the wage? Yeah, if
Like
you want
I'm-
to talk about it now, it's up to you.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm fine with all of these. You guys did a lot of hard work, and there's a lot more positions open. Wage-wise, I support it. I just wanted to make sure that, you could make that happen as soon as possible. If not, then if that was like a July thing, I'm supportive there too. But I think raising the wage is probably necessary. I mean, like you said, we've seen all these other industries doing it, so.
No, overall speaking, I think you're right in that it's the most competitive environment we've been in a long time for workers, and need to be on a even playing field as best we can. I think we've operated as lean as we possibly can over the last year, and it's starting to show some strain.
Yeah.
We're seeing it in our parks, we're seeing it in public works and so on. And so getting back to the way we're used to seeing things is critical. I think we've had grace by our neighbors because of the situation, but they're ready for us to see things the way it should be operating. So getting some of those positions filled is critical, I think.
And I think the county is looking at their pay scale, their pay structure as well, and doing an analysis to make sure that they're more competitive with private industry for the same reason, for morale, but then also being able to attract and retain talent. So it seems industry standard for us.
Well, let's do it before their analysis is done.
And I'd be supportive of a livable wage. So I think that the $15 an hour, if we can make that happen. And I think what I heard you say, that there were only just a couple of positions on this that were below that.
Those are the clerk positions. We'd have to look at each of these, but those
Okay.
we know for
Right.
sure.
And I'm sorry, could you refresh my memory? Those are
Well,
library clerk positions?
At least one of them is library. There's a clerk 2 also. I'm not sure where that is.
And these are,
Oh, that's in Parks and Rec.
Library assistants and a clerk 1.
So maybe just bring
Okay.
back to us
One in
what that.
police as well.
I'm just trying to get a good comparison, and maybe somebody from staff can answer this, but I'm just trying to get a good comparison about what's our starting firefighter salary right now? I mean, if we raise a clerk position up to $15 an hour, how does that compare with the starting firefighter salary? I don't know what that is.
Firefighters are more than $15 an hour.
I'm sorry?
Firefighters would be more than $15 an hour.
I realize that.
You're worried about salary compression.
I'm worried about compression, yes.
We'll need to step back and take a look at this impact, and then we'll have to talk about it, making some adjustments probably, right? I mean, we're in negotiations with SEIU this year. We'll talk to them about this issue. But where it's possible, you're not talking about a range, you're not talking about changing the classification, you're just talking about hiring somebody up higher in the range. Now, in some of these positions, that may not be possible. And normally we reserve that simply for people that we're bringing in that have a lot more experience. We bring them in higher. But if the council is concerned about $15 an hour and a living wage, then if that's the policy direction, then we can go ahead and make the adjustments and, as best we possibly can in that regard.
And I understand salary compression a little bit, but I also don't think anyone loses by making sure that everyone who works for the city has a livable wage and can afford to live at a socially acceptable standard in our city. So, I understand that too, but I think that we have an opportunity. People are going back to work. This is a very competitive environment. We have an opportunity with some of this money coming in from the feds, rebuilding what was, our city after incredible amounts of cuts we had to make last year under the worst circumstances, doing it right, building it back even better than it was. So, I think I support I think I hear the majority of the council is saying $15 an hour should be a starting wage amount for people who are working for our city, especially after, and I'll just throw this out there, I think it was 54 people who, might be more on the last analysis I saw, that actually go out and do the work during the flooding to make sure we're not flooding, who actually go out there during COVID and are working all hours of the night. People that we did 2 weeks in a row of proclamations showing our support and our appreciation for them. Some of those, it hurts to think that they're making less than $15 an hour. So I think this is our moment to, I guess as softly as I can, put our money where our mouth is by showing we'll do more than just proclamations as we call people back. We will also pay you enough to be able to live comfortably.
Bob, did you say it would be $200,000 annually to raise, I just want to make sure, to raise everybody up right now who is under $15 an hour to $15 an hour?
In the general fund with the reduced workforce. If we went into full employment, it would be more than that.
Yeah.
So we'd have to just prepare.
But we're not going to be at full employment.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking for sustainability and in the future
Right.
when we don't have these funds,
Right.
to be able to make sure that we can still fill that gap,
Because there's
right?
no going back.
So,
Right.
okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
and maybe we can, that $250,000 extra we have coming in July every year because of, that's projected into the general fund, maybe we can use that to offset, this money as well. That's coming in from the changes in our tax policy at the state level.
That's the general direction. We'll go ahead and move forward. Okay. All right. So then we're at the service reinstatements. Don't know if there's any of these you want to reconsider, knowing that we have a gap to fill, or whether you're comfortable staying with these decisions from your last retreat.
When do you think you'll hear on number 2, the early, like the litter?
It's going to be a little while.
Okay.
What was your question? I'm sorry, could you repeat?
When would he hear about back on number 2, the early literacy outreach?
Oh, okay, thank you.
You could just make this a 22 implementation, get us the rest of the year to work through that issue. Because there's multiple players here, and so it's the work 259 does, with the work, the Head Start work that's done by Child Start. I mean, it's, you know, and I've talked to different people and I get different answers regarding what our role, whether our role is really that significant, or, and I think we all agree that this is what we should be doing in terms of early childhood education, but whether or not it's what we should be, whether we should have this position, or whether we just support our partners that are out doing that, and we make sure that we have the right resources in the advanced learning library, the branches.
I think until we know more about what the other ARPA uses might be and how they might attack some of this,
Yeah.
we should probably hold it.
Yeah, I have no problem holding not doing the 21.
Yeah.
And by then, we'll have a better idea of how 259, for instance, is going to be using their ARPA funds.
And that's for the early literacy outreach.
Right.
Right.
For those who are
Right.
watching at home. So it would be the hold back on the 2021 funds as we,
Could you refresh my memory? When we had the April 8th retreat, I remember talking about the early literacy outreach and maybe seeing too if Child Start had some sort of partnership opportunities or different things too.
Yeah.
So USD 259 and maybe other
Right.
entities.
On this page, I want to ask about grounds maintenance. I know we would like to reduce our mowing cycles for right-of-ways. I guess I would, based on all the other things we want to do we get lots of complaints about that? I don't know if anybody's here from Parks, but anybody know? Because what we're doing is letting our grass grow a little bit taller in the right-of-ways, right? And then we're mowing it. This is just right-of-ways.
Right.
This isn't parks,
I think what I hear from my folks in my district is they see it in the right of way, and so then they want it for them as well.
they want to be able to let their grass grow.
Right.
to
So
14
they're saying if the
inches.
city's doing it, why can't we? Why are you
Yeah.
holding us to a different standard than what you're doing?
Yeah.
So I think it's harder for enforcement to do their jobs if we're stretching it out.
Yeah, what I've heard from the park department is they, remember how we talked about core services? You remember that discussion? They consider the mowing of parks to be more of a core service than the mowing of right-of-ways, because that's what they exist for, is to have a park department. But what I remember hearing from them in the past is that they'll get more calls about right-of-ways because people are driving by them, and they have more visibility. And then the feedback about why do I have to mow my yard if you don't mow your stuff? And since we're under contract, I think it would be, the cycle is doubled right now from what it used to be last year. So
Yeah.
that's
So
just
it
what
was
I've
like
heard from them.
So it was 7 days, I'm making these numbers up, but it was like 7 days and now it's 14, something like that.
Something along those lines,
Yeah.
right? And so that might not be a terrible extension in the third week of July, but in the second, first or second week of June, that might be,
Yeah.
harder to deal with. So they're just speaking on their behalf, what I remember from the past.
Yeah.
As long as Douglas and hydraulic gets cut. I hear about that all.
The intersection of Tyler and Ridge. Thank you.
You stole my line.
Where's Pete Meitzner when I need him?
I usually say Tyler and
Yes,
Mays.
So,
Where is that?
Yeah.
Colorado.
Well,
We can come back and talk next week.
that's what I'd
Yeah.
at least like to, because some of these other things, I look at them, I understand cutting grass is important. But when I look at some of these other things, and we've got $15 million to cut.
Right.
So,
Okay, why don't we go to page 4?
And let me make sure that's correct too. That's $15 million to cut unless the millage is raised, right? Unless the
no,
mill levy is
it's
raised?
15
No.
million out of this
Okay.
that we can't do. I shouldn't say cut, because we're not cutting it, but we won't
have
do it.
$15 million more dollars worth of stuff in here
Then
that
we
Yeah.
can spend it.
So number 9, we knew this was going to happen eventually, that the grant would run out and would have to add it back in, correct?
Absolutely.
So we got to take care of it.
Yeah, every time that
I
we do a
agree.
grant, we always say, there's no guarantee you're going to continue the positions. But in this case, there was a service need, that's why we went after the grant. And, I had always assumed that we would have to find a way to absorb this into the budget when we applied for the SAFER grant funds.
And
And I
this is a
think-
way to do it.
Yeah, we would, whenever, like you said, we always talk from the bench about sustaining positions if they're grant funded. I mean,
Right.
it's great to get grants, but the unintended consequences, you have to come up with the money later, but it would be hard not to fund once they're established.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great, especially if we get the other grant, that would put, this is 12 positions, firefighters trained, ready to go, who are already out there. And if we get the other grant, we would have 4 years of 12 more positions while they are doing the real-time analytical study, which would help with that adjustment as well.
Well, it could offset or at least part of the optimization on the next page, right? Because we've got 3 million set aside for some initiatives that if we end up getting that grant right now, that could offset part of that.
Oh, yeah.
Or add to it, depending upon which way we went,
Yeah.
what the study says, so.
Yeah, exactly.
So Bob, I know it says it, but just to clarify in my head, and then, not everybody has the luxury of having these documents in front of them, but it says the apparatus needs would be addressed from the existing Wichita Fire Department reserve. So if the 12 new positions, everything would, it's not going to be a burden on the fire department for what they need. Okay, thank you.
Are there other opportunities with ARPA for first responders?
There are, and we're exploring those. We think there's going to be more money that goes into SAFER. That's one of the things I was looking at. There are 2 different categories, I think, for fire, and I think more money is going into the COPS program on the police side. And we're waiting for those opportunities for the grant regulations and the timeframes and application process to come forward. We don't have anything. We do, fire department especially has been really good at monitoring those ARPA opportunities. So I get a report weekly from the chief, and we haven't received that information yet from is it FEMA? I can't remember the agency.
Can you talk a little bit more about the police property and
Yeah, I was just
evidence? I'm
looking.
trying to figure out if that's 2 positions or 4 positions, and 2 are in the matrix, and,
The which, I'm sorry?
Number 17.
yeah, police
Oh,
and.
yeah. So this is an important issue to the chief, and frankly, this is one that if we weren't going through this process, I would recommend these positions. There's concern about making sure that you have the proper procedures for checking in materials, keeping them secure, and monitoring checkouts as well. And there are some weaknesses that came up in the review by an independent contractor or vendor consultant that said that there are some procedural improvements that are necessary, and that includes adding these positions in order to be able to address those. I think the chief's initial request was 4 positions, if I remember right. I've got it here. I'm sorry?
If I remember correctly, I think what we've costed out in the first year is lieutenant and 2 service officers, or maybe a lieutenant and 1 service officer, and then adding more service officers in the second year.
Because it says 2 positions, but it's almost $450,000.
Yeah, it says initially the need for 2 positions, and then after the evaluating the effectiveness of 2 more staff, additional positions
So
could
4
be
plus.
considered.
Must
Yeah,
be-
so there's already people there, but this is adding to the existing staff.
It must be 2 in 2021, and then
And then you
2 more.
That is correct, because it's got a $400,000 price tag for 6 positions total.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, that's one of those, as we continue to work through the process, It was not my intention to recommend that we go to their full funding amount. What this says is this is what has been requested for the full funding. I just want to come in at the 213 level, or actually I think I came in at one position, didn't I, in my original recommendation? We want you to see the full recommendation from the police department.
Well, so we might want to consider that 2 positions, maybe we can't do 4, but I don't know, just with some,
And that's just staffing, no facility capital.
Yeah, they.
Is that
will-
a separate ask later?
Actually, we've programmed quite a few capital projects related to the property and evidence facility in the CIP. I think there's one for the sprinkler-ing, right? That maybe just started or is gonna be underway soon. So we've programmed that in the CIP. This is to address the staffing issues.
This was a departmental priority, and I wanted to make sure that we had at least one position. In 2010, when we were in budget cuts, we eliminated a clerk 3 position. So I wanted to make sure that the clerk 3 position was added and a service officer was added in order to be able to go ahead and start moving us in the right direction. So that would take us probably closer to that 213 number mark, or
Yeah, I
Elizabeth?
think the first year here is a lieutenant and a service officer. So if you did a clerk 3 and a service officer, well, the diversion clerk is a clerk 3 on line 10. So it would probably be closer to 120 to 150.
Yeah, so that would have been my recommendation, based on my review of the budget and their needs at this point. So that's a clerk and a service officer. And that'll get us going in terms of better inventory. We need to change procedures. We have modernized our procedures in terms of handling of evidence and property. So those are all things that would be done in here.
so we could look at that one.
We can bring that down.
Yeah, okay.
I'd like to chat about number 14, because, I mean, some things in here are to expand or to enhance, but the way I read number 14, talking about demolition funding with MABCD, it sounds like a necessity. Like, do they have to have it to get through the end of the year, right?
do.
I mean, some other things, like I said, are enhancing or, making things better, but that one sounds like we don't almost have a choice, if I'm reading it correctly.
Right.
I don't think that gets through year end.
You don't think it'll make?
I don't think that gets through year end.
I
I think they need more than that, but
I think that they didn't use as many they didn't use as much CDBG funding during the pandemic because of the public hearing requirements. So they plan on having this funding bridge that gap and then move into CDBG more. And this is what the department provided to us, so we didn't slim it down at all. This is what they asked for, so.
So they could have left money on the table and didn't, so.
Yeah, but this is one you're probably accustomed to seeing budget adjustments in year end with regard to demolition funding. But this is, for now, what they've represented. I suppose that was a month ago, so we should probably circle back.
And how about number 19, the engineering software? Can we just talk about that a little bit more, just to understand what that means? What are right-of-way permits? What do people do with those?
Things like curb cuts,
Oh,
things like that for
Okay.
utilities, I think. Pretty sure. Their technology solution is something that somebody had come up with a long time ago. The staff isn't here anymore. They found a good solution for them that they think is pretty cost effective, so that they can get more staff out in the field. I think they are a division that is carrying a lot of vacancies right now, so that's important. Even if they're able to hire people tomorrow, there's a lot of onboarding associated with those positions, and they're also quite busy right now. I mean, just the volume of projects, SA has picked up a lot too, so this would help provide them, this would allow them to do their core function and then have some automation for that administrative work.
Thanks.
I almost sound like I work for them. I don't, but from the standpoint of the finance department, it is a good one-time investment in allowing, we talked a lot about making investments last year that make us leaner in the future, and I definitely get the sense that this is one of those.
It sounds like work smarter, not harder.
Yes.
Right.
That's exactly right. We've
Yeah.
got 4 inspectors, and we basically have the equivalent of 1 inspector that is handling these permits on a full-time basis.
Yeah,
Well, it could be out inspecting.
That could be outside, out
Yeah.
That
inspecting.
makes sense.
and that's probably not what their job, that's not
Yeah.
why they work here,
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
On Park and Rec refuse collection, that was another one that, again, I would probably not be recommending if we're doing this through the traditional approach. I wanted to bring it to your attention, but because we've, the great benefit in the last year is people have rediscovered our parks, right?
Yeah.
But I also have 2 pieces of equipment, 2 existing Packers that need to be replaced. And so we've made provisions in the base operating budget and in the equipment replacement fund to replace those with new Packers. And I know that we're still come up short with, a new 3rd crew, but I have to think that with new equipment that we can be a little more effective in what we do. And so if you're looking at some of the other issues on here that are priorities for you, may mean that we still have some delays in cleaning, the garbage cans in parks, but that would be the offset to maybe achieving higher priority projects you have in here.
Yeah.
And we are committed to getting new equipment for the existing crews.
So you are in favor of this one being funded?
No, I wasn't, but I wanted to bring it forward because there is a service need expressed by the department, and I thought this is a good time for you to talk about that.
Which number are you referring to?
15, yeah.
I do think that, it was great during 2020 to see parks being utilized more robustly and people discovering them. I think the unintended consequences is exactly this. So when we're thinking of these funds in the pure sense of being recovery, we're supposed to be addressing issues that maybe were brought because of COVID. This was an issue that was brought because of COVID, but I'm not going to champion it, but I do think it's a problem that was an unintended consequence that none of us probably saw coming, but was a good thing.
And I'm wondering, just kind of, same regards to the previous speaker's comments about an uptick in folks in the parks during the pandemic. I do wonder, the wording here is illegal dumping. It's not so much just more people are there, so you have more litter. During the pandemic, it seems like people were under incredible financial stress. Perhaps folks who moved or needed to get rid of the stuff in their house or couldn't afford to go to the dump, or what I'm saying is does the economic stresses of the pandemic, is that the reason that caused more illegal dumping, and thus that might not be a bigger problem moving forward as it was last year?
Yeah, unfortunately, they faced significant illegal dumping challenges before the pandemic.
Okay. Right.
That is, in fact, this isn't in a park, but one time we did a social media town hall topic about illegal dumping, and we had a picture of tires dumped in the big ditch, and somebody asked, "Oh, where do I take my tires to dump them in the big ditch? I can't remember that place." So this is not a new thing. I would suspect that it did increase. An alternative, this is a program option we've seen multiple times. An alternative could be, rather than hiring a 3rd piece of equipment, that right now they use both trucks in the summertime, but only 1 truck in the winter because the not driver, but the helper is a seasonal employee. An alternative could make that service cycles year-round, or another alternative could be, rather than just, I don't know what schedule they're on, but using the trucks more hours in a week rather than to correspond with someone with a 40-hour work week. And so you could just use the equipment more. So But
We have seen an increase in illegal dumping of mattresses because there's an increased cost of, at the landfill now for mattress dumps. So people are now just tossing them wherever they can find. And so that's added to it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
We collected 201 mattresses and 770 tires in 2020. 318 tons of trash.
It would be interesting just to explore all these variables, because it's a persistent problem, is what I'm hearing from staff. The language here is an increased use of parks led to significant dumping. And also, I'd be interested to know last year if we had, at the same level as previous years, neighborhood cleanups.
Yeah. No.
You know,
Oh, no.
where
Oh.
neighbor associations normally get a grant, and then you can go and get a truck. We would have a big cleanup. I'm guessing we didn't have many of those last year. Like, are there other contributing factors to this that we could explore to see if there's a way to dig into this number a little bit and still have the desired outcome?
Yeah, we did maintain our neighborhood cleanups last year for those neighborhoods that were willing to do them. We do have a funding challenge this year, so there'll probably be some reduction. But Mayor, I mean, you're right. I mean, from 19 to 20, we had an 80% increase in mattresses and a 200% increase in tires, right? So in terms of the pandemic and people looking for alternative places to dump.
But I think last year is when the county also increased the cost
fee
on mattresses.
Yep. Yeah, which has had impact in the neighborhoods as well. So, yeah.
And I think these are two things in this. It's increased use of parks and significant illegal dumping activity. Because if, you know, as Councilmember Fry talked about getting complaints about grass growing taller in the right-of-ways, I get complaints about trash cans overflowing in parks. And again, why doesn't the city clean up their parks? I can't do this at my house, let trash overflow like that. So those are two different things in the refuse area.
It's not just the dump.
A good point. I joke that it's an indication that things are getting back to normal. My Twitter feed is now filled with pictures of random trash. And Mayor, come pick this up. So I totally understand it. And with that, is there a more, and just a question, just to show my ignorance, I guess, with this, is there a more holistic way that we can approach this problem? I mean, I guess the litter study will help us a bit more, but is there more? We got overflowing trash cans over here, we have dumping. Is there a way that we can address this problem more concise, or are we just going to kind of continue to address it in two different ways?
Yeah, that's the problem that we have in neighborhoods as well, right? I mean, because these numbers are probably not that different than what we're seeing in a number of neighborhoods around the city. I just looked at some other additional information that we have. In 2017, we had about 330 incidents of dumping. In 2020, this is in the parks. In 2020, we were up to 750. So, but I think we could say, I mean, we can show neighborhoods where that has been the common theme. And I do think that the vice mayor is right. I mean, I think some of this does have to do with the change in the fee structure for mattresses, and at least that's a portion of what we're looking at.
I believe the vice mayor blamed the county commission, is that correct? We should.
It's a county landfill, I believe.
Oh, okay.
And the prices went up. I don't know whose decision that was, but.
Well, again, leave it up to you in terms of going forward.
Yes, would there be support from the council today to recommend that the manager move forward with general fund hiring and service reinstatements minus early literacy outreach?
I would want some more information on early literacy outreach, on what our community partners were. And I only say that because during the pandemic, people like my son had to learn first grade completely online. He did okay. We are seeing a different learning model over this last year. Do we need kind of a opportunity for kids to get caught up, and what's our role in that opportunity? So again, as we spoke, or as the manager articulated earlier, are other partnered programs who work in this space, are they able to cover some of that? So I'd just be interested to know what is the role of the nonprofit community and some of these extra educational organizations, and if we do kind of give them more of a role in this, then I think I'd be more comfortable with cutting on literacy.
Yeah, and that's why I only recommended 21. I think we need some time to be able to work with these other agencies, look at the funding they're going to receive, and I think this came out of the last retreat as well. What you're asking for is to make sure that we understand from a comprehensive standpoint, how are we dealing with getting materials to the early childhood providers, right? And we're going to need more time to figure out what that best model, best practice ought to be. And I need time to talk to the superintendent. We're not going to be able to figure that out in a week. And even if we started the process this summer, we probably wouldn't have anybody on board until late in the year. So if we leave it in 22, that gives us the flexibility to spend the rest of this year working on it, and then you can revisit it. If we find out others are playing in that arena better, and it's more important for us to have the right materials at the library and all of that, then I can bring that to you and you can revisit that in 22.
Right. Or is there a possibility that we can check, see if there's Recovery Act money in which we could utilize with partners in our community for any of that? We might not be able to activate it through our programs, but if we work with, let's say, KPTS used to have a literacy outreach program where they would go and pass out books and work with people. Could we help them access that and to cover this, even if we couldn't use that directly?
I know Child Start's going after ARPA money that's earmarked for providers of healthcare. I mean, of childcare. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, there's a Head Start category, I think, in the education title.
Specifically, yep.
Yeah, for literacy.
And this is what we talked about on April 8th, is getting
Right.
all those partners together.
Right.
Yeah, the other thing about the items on number 3 and number 4, some of them really lend themselves to resident engagement topics. I mean, that doesn't mean they need to be included necessarily, but if you're not real certain, is this the direction we want to go, maybe not, that could be a good chance to get feedback.
We'll make a few calls just to see where we are before, and we'll bring that back to talk next week. And then I'm hearing, what we'll do is reduce, we'll have 2 positions in property and evidence and show that through. And then we'll double check with MABCD to make sure we're okay on a demolition funding supplemental funding we need. Okay. I wanted to get to the discussions on the remaining topics. So the budget initiatives, I wanted your feedback on those.
So again, on number 21, we have 7 positions that are grant funded right now that we would have to have funding going forward when it expires.
No, 21, wait a minute.
So the initial plan was to add for the 2020.
It's a match.
The 2020 revised budget would have all of phase 2. And we delayed 7 positions because of this COPS grant, because it had a pretty significant match.
Right.
And at the time, we could not accommodate that in the general fund model. So the idea was to defer those final 7 positions to when this COPS grant is done, which it's finished in 2023. The interesting thing about the way the grant is structured is the grant period's through 23, but 23 is almost 100% local match. It's one of those kind of grants. So this would be moving those 7 positions up 2 years. So what happens when the grant ends for the DV programming? That would be, I guess, a different question. So.
Yeah, I apologize. We'll need to put this on hold, and I need a week to work through this. I think the chief would tell you that this puts him 7 down, that this doesn't, because he had anticipated that these 7 positions were part of his staffing plan, and if you take this out, then you're 7 down plus phase 3. And so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and before you take action on that, so.
That's why I asked the question. 'Cause
Thank
was
you, I appreciate
confused
that,
as well.
yep. Okay.
And on number 23, are we modeling a program, or is this something that we're creating ourselves?
I'll let Dante address that.
A little bit of both. So Chief Ramsey's done some initial research on some record programs.
Thank you.
Chief Ramsey's done some preliminary research on violence and record programs across the nation. As a part of the Mayor's Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge, we developed what we believe to be a pilot program that adopts some best practices of violence interrupters. Also works in some of the work that Sally is doing in housing. The manager mentioned other departments, Park and Rec. So we've developed a pilot program that we proposed during the Bloomberg process. Anticipate hearing back from that within the next 30 days. But where we are is taking a look at best practices and see what makes the most sense.
So are you saying that if we don't get the Bloomberg grant, this is our cost, or is this a match?
The Bloomberg grant is $1 million, no match. In lieu of the Bloomberg grant, assuming that we don't get funded through Bloomberg, this would be a $500,000 seed to start the program.
All right.
If you look up, I think the chief told me, I think Baltimore.
Several cities, I think Baltimore was one, Oakland, California was another.
Yeah, there's some good like YouTube videos of the actual work, and they go into the community and work with community on that. So there's folks in the community that have more trust than law enforcement, and they work with those folks to help reduce violence.
I'd like, if we're done, I'd like to talk about 24 just for a moment. I'm all about having funding for a rainy day, right? Like, hopefully we all have reserves just in case. You never know what's going to happen. And it says for potentially dynamic revenue and unanticipated, activities. I just wonder, I know it's really hard to predict and to forecast. I mean, I totally get that. I'm just curious. I'm just thinking if that's, I mean, if we look at the 18 million total, that's 12 of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 2/3 of the total, which I love having money set aside for, unanticipated things, especially in these challenging times. We don't know what's going to happen, but I'm just, I don't know. I'd just like to hear from others what they think about that.
Well, and maybe Mark would know. My understanding is he worked in the legislature at one point or another. What is the standard or the subjectable standard from the legislature? We're supposed to have a rainy day fund. It's a percentage of our budget. We almost, in the legislature, never do it, almost always waive it, but it was a standard that was set that was a percentage of the budget, maybe 7.5%. It sounds familiar, but maybe either the manager or Mark remembers, and maybe we can compare this to that to see.
Yeah, council has a policy that's been set regarding the budget as a percentage of expenditures, Mark. The reserve, as a percentage.
Right.
Yeah.
12%.
We've talked about reserves a lot in relation to our rating agencies. You may recall last year we had some pretty dynamic discussions about that. Our city policy is 10, but we'd rather have 15. That's basically what your policy says. We also looked at guidance for GFOA. GFOA is closer to 16 to 17%. We look at our peer cities. A lot of our peer cities are closer to 20 and 30%. So it's subjective, but I would tell you that at least 15% is what your policy is right now.
So given that COVID is the type of year we had, if we double that 30%, let's say take the standard practice or subjectable standard plus that 5% to be on the safe side, double it as if we had another crazy year again, because that's our life now. 30% of the Harper funds, we would still be able to shave a little bit off if we needed to. Is that a correct assessment?
Let me reframe what you're talking about here just a little bit, because we may have confused you a little bit. if you remove that $12 million,
I'm not saying remove, I was just
okay,
reduce.
let's just say for the sake of argument that
I would
12 million is there.
follow a subjective standard is I think what we're talking about.
What we would tell you is you will have a deficit in the general fund then of $5 million in 2023 and $7 million in 2024. In other words,
That's what I needed
this
to know.
was using that to fill that projected hole that we would have. Yeah. So the suggestion was that it's fungible, so you could hold it in reserve in case we had a general fund deficit, which we would under our projections. But if that deficit didn't occur because our revenues are dynamic, then you would have a reserve that you could then divert to other programs if you chose to.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All I needed to know.
So is it, if it's paying for that, is it really in reserves?
Well,
Or is it coming out of what it's gaining?
I mean, I guess the idea is just to set aside $12 million of the ARPA award to hold until 2023 or 2024, to reassess what our general fund condition is in a year or two. And if the condition is such that we need it to balance the general fund, we'll use it in that way. And if revenues have grown faster than we expected or expenditures have grown slower, then we could repurpose the ARPA reserve for community investments or capital projects.
Another thing you could do is you could say you want ultimately to get to 20, you will hope to get to $20 million for community initiatives, but 12 of that could be out of this. In other words, you have 8 that goes, you know you're going to spend in years 1 and 2, but we've got 4 years to spend this, right, or 3 years. And so you could say we're going to take that $8 million and prioritize that for a few of these projects. Then we want to continue to fund some of these initiatives as we have money that's available out of this. So we're off on our estimates, we're too conservative, and we don't have the deficits projected, that then you can use that for ARPA eligible community initiatives. So you'd state your intent to be doing that. And this time next year, we'll have a much better idea of where we would be for 23, and then again, the year after that for 24.
Do we get to invest the ARPA reserve and take the income?
Right now, there's not a lot of income for City of Wichita investments, but that is actually a common topic in all of the
I got some
listservs and
Bitcoin
such that
you
I've
can
been
buy.
heard of.
Got some Dogecoin?
Some
So-
cryptocurrency?
Okay, we'll just talk about that.
So that, there has been a lot of discussion about that, and I think there'll probably be some more clarity with the interim rule. I mean, the final rule.
But that's a way to look at these combined. And let's be honest, I mean, some of these community initiatives are not going to get off the ground initially anyway, right?
Right.
There's probably things you want to do soon on employment assistance, workforce development. If there's a feeling we've got people that need to get back to work that have been significantly impacted by the pandemic. But you'd have to show a special need that goes above and beyond the money that Workforce Alliance has right now, for instance, or WSU Tech. If you did that, then that allows you to do the strategy Mark talked about on the capital projects, which are on page 7.
On the library branches, are there staff adjustments for those if they call for them? Because I think the Westlink Library had doubling in size. I think it required an extra staff person.
Yeah, that's my recollection, is there is some staff implications from that. And I think it's outlined in the report, in the, not here, but in the branch library report.
Okay.
Bob, can you say a little bit more about 27 with cultural facilities, capital maintenance, just in general? Can you give some examples?
Oh, some examples. That's a typical project, an ongoing project that we have in the CIP every year. Some examples I can think of off the top of my head, I think we did some HVAC repairs or replacement at the art museum. We've done HVAC at the aviation museum. Those are some examples.
Those are all the facilities that we own,
Yeah.
that others are leasing out.
Yeah.
So in the CIP, I see 250 for Century 2 and $1,050,000 for cultural facilities. That would be the 1.3. Is that the two areas?
I think it's just.
that correct?
Yeah.
Is that
Okay.
combined?
Cultural facility.
So again, this is moving up these projects?
No, no, I
Just
don't believe so.
backfilling.
It's cash funding those that are, go ahead, Mark, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's cash funding instead of.
Somewhat. The ARFA money is going to arrive probably Friday or Monday, half of it, and the other half will arrive in a year from now. So from a cash flow standpoint, we will have the resources to accelerate the funding of these projects. It's probably dependent on whether we can get them designed in time. So I would tell you, yes, we can probably accelerate some of these to the capacity of staff, maybe a year, not a lot, but a little bit. We would not be constrained from a fiscal standpoint on when we completed them, is what I would tell you. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the added benefit of some of these capital projects too is that we're going to be, it's putting a boost in our local economy, right? I mean, if we're gonna replace HVC or roofs or do expansion of our capital facilities, we're gonna be hiring people to pay that. So hopefully it's also stimulating our local economy.
It's absolutely huge boost.
That's exactly one reason why we did it, because that's one of the purposes, as you astutely pointed out, of ARPA is to stimulate the economy. So that's one reason. We
Do I get a
did it.
gold star today, Mark?
So I guess the question is, why was it cultural facilities and not maybe fire stations? Because I know we've got 3.3 million in fire stations in 2, 3, and 6. And so why not fire stations instead of cultural facilities?
If I remember correctly, the fire stations aren't until the out years of the CIP.
No, it's 2023.
It could.
Yeah, for the first one. Yeah, I guess it's 3.3 million each.
It could. Again, we developed this list. We had several parameters. I'll be totally honest with you. One was to meet the parameters of ARPA. Like I said, public safety is an ARPA eligible activity. Cultural arts is, and so we tailored around that. But another reason was we were trying to get close to about $23 million, which is what generated a $2 million cash flow.
Right. I guess I would just ask us to be flexible and consider the fire response optimization study. And if there's something that comes out of that says maybe we need to put a station here versus what we've got, and maybe the money should go towards that than instead of fixing a fire station right now. Depending upon what that study says.
When would we do this study? I'm sorry, I should know that, but the fire optimization
It's underway
study.
now.
It's underway now?
Yeah, they've got software and they're putting the data in now.
Okay. When will we see that completed?
I can't tell you for sure because I don't remember the time frame in terms of the actual analysis.
And the only reason I'm asking, and if I'm asking this wrong, please correct me at any time, but if it's like we're halfway through 2021 right now, I mean, if it's not going to be completed till the end of the year or 2022, then we wouldn't do anything with fire until 23 anyway. Am I correct
Well,
in
on the
saying that?
station side, but on the reason we put $1 million in starting in '22 is because the work will be done before the end of the year or by the end of the year, and so we wanted you to have the flexibility for staffing especially and possible equipment.
Okay.
Because it may be, some of the issues may have to do with not just the location of the station, but how we equip and
The
staff it,
station.
right?
Okay.
So.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you for that.
And that's what I'm suggesting, is that we just really think strategically on this as we
Yeah.
go forward. Because, this is just maintenance funding for these cultural facilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's not any specific project, whereas the fire stations and the staffing has obviously been challenged with COVID, I think, too, as well, so.
It'd be interesting, just for the people who are listening, I know that the council knows this, but the fire study is an ongoing analytic-based study utilizing software that the sample is it's ongoing, like what is 6 months versus 1 year, and they make adjustments to the plan to try to get better results. So just want to make that clear to anyone who's watching that this isn't equivalent or the same might be equivalent, but it's not the same as, let's say, the policing study where it was a study with a recommended outcome. The outcome on this, I think, is going to be more agile until it's optimized, so.
Okay, I have one more question. This is to understand the CIP. So that 23.6, that's backfilling CIP with ARPA, which gives us that flexibility of $2 million per year back in the general fund.
Yes, ma'am, exactly correct.
So if that's the case, is that reflected in the budget? Am I?
It's on the slide, I think that has a mistake. There you go.
So it's in
Is that
those,
capital
It's the
fund
$2
project
million
in
amounts.
23, 24? The 2 million?
See the second line down, capital project funding?
What this slide is showing
oh,
you,
into the revised general fund. I see, yes.
what this slide is showing you simplistically is if you take 26 million in ARPA funds to offset capital projects, and if you reserve 12 million in ARPA funds for general fund reserves, then you have a balanced general fund for 4 years. Then you have the remaining ARPA funds to spend. That's the simple version of what this is trying to show you. If you don't shift the mill levy or you don't reserve the $12 million in ARPA funds, you have more ARPA funds to spend, but you have a starting base of an unsustainable general fund.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And I think this was said, but if we utilize the ARPA funds, we could get some of these capital projects done sooner, possibly depending on
And
ability.
Another consideration too is some of these capital projects have already been deferred once. Because last year we were in a spot and we shifted $500,000 for 2 years. And these were the kind of projects, because they're all GO, there's no LST involved or outside funding. So these are ones we've already shifted once. So using the ARPA ensures that they don't just get done faster, but they don't also, that we don't have to worry about delaying them.
Right.
But by doing them quicker, we might even be able to save more money. Is that a?
Yeah, so I've not heard
Lumber
really
costs right now.
positive things
You
about
can predict
construction
construction
costs right
lumber.
now.
Yeah.
Don't use lumber.
Legos.
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 Everything's gonna be Legos.
Yeah,
No
we could
lumbers.
call
You're
WDDC,
fine.
they've got a good Lego setup.
Anything else, any other input you want to provide, any other discussion? What else you need before next week?
Did we want to talk any more about the community investments? We kind of revisited everything else but that, and I'm not saying we have to, but it's the only thing that we haven't looked at again with a little deeper dive, but.
I think the biggest issue is the dollar amount, right?
Yeah.
Because I know you're going to have, community needs that are going to come forward. And the county's doing a needs assessment. We'll want to look at that document, what comes out of that.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, is if we could somehow align strategically with the county, I think we get more bang for our buck.
Yeah, the only thing I will say is I looked at their survey. It's more geared to the services they provide.
Gotcha.
So some of the things in here would not jump out on that survey because you're going to be dealing with mental health issues and other social service programs that they provide through ComCare and other providers.
Well, I know that workforce development and training would be really good, if not with the county, but I know that Keith Loyne was able to receive, I think, $10 million in their organization. Is there a way that we can, I guess, get more bang for our buck, partnering with some of their programs that would meet similar goals? And I mean, I'm comfortable with just reserving this money for now, so long as we can come up with a real strategic plan and strategy, and not have it be, I think, more, just more spotty, I guess. If it real strategic plan, we would have a lot of really good opportunities with this.
Yeah, if you read it, it's more of a problem statement than it is a solution. our program statement fall together.
And I think as we think about these, whatever we decide to do with however much money we have in there, a couple of things, leveraging partners, programs and money, like you talked about with the Workforce Alliance, so they've got that $10 million grant. And I would hope that we're going to do something bold with it, because if we don't, then we're not making any difference. If we don't do something new and bold, if we just continue down kind of the path we're going, I'm not sure we'll have the effect that we want to have with this.
Right.
Oh, yeah, this is the
Gotta be
moment,
big,
for sure.
bold.
Big and
That's,
bold.
yeah, that's why I'm a fan of 31 and just really, thinking about smart manufacturing,
Yeah.
robotics, digital transformation. How do we really think about diversity? This is an excellent, I think when we did budget retreats back in 2020, I remember saying to Eco Devo that I hoped we would look for opportunities that came from the pandemic. And I think this is just a chance to go back and really revisit that. So I'm especially interested in that one.
Oh, yeah, and I would love someone to be able to explain me more exactly what 31 is. Like, I understand it, but also I really understand workforce development and how we can ensure that everyone has access to a proper education so that they can change with the changing economy. Small business and entrepreneurial development, something we've done a lot of work with. I just want more information when we get a chance about this department. I know that smart manufacturing, digital transformation, I agree with the concept. I just want to know more about our role in it and how we see ourselves in that role and how we can be effective.
Is that helpful?
It is. The only thing that hasn't been addressed, I think, was brought up by Councilmember Cirillo, and then Councilmember Fry picked up on it. And this is a wild card in it, and that is we're not dealing with quality of life in terms of recreational amenities that could also lead to tourism, right? So we've identified 3 projects that we know are out there. You're going to get a study on South Lakes and redoing South Lakes for a regional facility. We know you're going to get the CLAP master plan to look at, and then we do have Crystal Prairie Lake, which has been put on hold for an extended period of time, which is also meant to be a regional attraction. So if you did that, it's basically what you would do is probably substitute a community initiative, right? Because that's the only way you're going to fund
But that
it.
also gives us another $1 million to the general fund. 12 million in capital funding gives us $1 million back to the general fund.
Neither of those projects are in the CIP right now.
Right.
So they wouldn't, unfortunately, they wouldn't read.
None of the 3 are in the CIP.
CLAP
That's right.
and South Lakes, and what was the third one?
Crystal Prairie.
Oh, Crystal, yeah, unfortunately.
It was in it, but it got pulled, but it's still not as a,
Yeah, unfortunately, you only get that ability to shift mill levy when it's a programmed project in the current CIP.
That's why it has to be above and beyond dollars. You had to give up some other ARPA use. And I'm just, since it came up, I just thought I ought to plant that seed and determine, otherwise, we'd have to look at those through the regular CIP and then have to build.
So can someone get me caught up on the lake? What was it?
On South Lake or Crystal
South
Prairie?
Lake.
Which, are we making a lake now? This sounds like something that started before I got here, so.
The lake has been made,
Pretty much
in the
done.
process. Well, they
Okay.
actually they want to extend the shoreline a little bit more, but.
That's been going on for a while. Wasn't it like under Brewer
I've
when
got
it
a copy
started?
of it in my office, I can bring it
Okay.
to you later.
Okay, yeah, I just was unaware of
Started
what our
under
current role
both.
is with that.
Councilmember Claycomb and I on the park board.
Okay.
So it's dated back some time, but
And I just apologize. It's just like, wait, what are we spending money on? I just want to get caught up on it.
Yeah.
So I
Since
can.
1912, we've been working.
Right. So it's,
wow, you talking about her or me or both?
Yikes.
It is,
Talk about me.
John's the one getting here.
This is when Bob says, time to go.
Time to go.
but it
This
is
is
a
when we
park.
say it's a good thing your evaluation's done for this year.
It is a park, though.
Yeah.
It's not just, it's not there's a lake in the park, but it's a park.
Yes.
Okay.
So when you look at Councilmember Fry's,
Pretty extensive. In fact, I think an award was given for the
Yeah,
master plan.
for the design.
Wait, did you say who?
There was an award given to the
Award.
city for the, yeah, for the.
Oh, I thought you said
national-
Ward, like back when Jim Ward was a rep here.
Oh.
There was-
That
Oh,
was really
geez.
Yeah, Not that far back, yeah.
Gotta get to the
It's
historic
called
setting
Crystal
of the
Lake,
meeting.
right?
Yeah, Crystal
Read it.
Lake.
Yes, that's why I explained.
That's Brooks Landfill,
Yeah, better than that.
Kingsbury.
Okay, we'll try to get some more information, frame some things up, and we'll ask for you maybe to pin things down a little bit more after, on the meeting of the first, after the regular council meeting. That work?
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah,
Thank you, Bob.
thank
Thank
you,
you,
Bob
Bob.
and
Thank you.
Elizabeth and Mark.
Staff.